All right, today's an introduction to a brand new unit, and this unit is called the Emergence of the First Global Age. So we're talking about from the 15th to the 18th centuries. And after watching this video, hopefully you have a framework of the vocab and the ideas behind this part of history. But I'd like to take a step back first before we move forward. And we just got done with a very, very lengthy unit, this unit of increased hemispheric interactions that went on from about 300 to 1500. We're still not a global world at this point, well, until 1492. And if you recall here with our geohistogram, we learned about a lot of people, the people of the Americas, the Mayas and the Aztecs and the Inca and the barbarian groups of Europe, the Franks and the Angles and the Vikings of Scandinavia and Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantines that came after Rome fell and the Trans-Saharan Trade Network and the West African Trade Networks, the Great Zimbabwe, the rise of Islam and the Caliphates, the rise of the Mongols and its subsequent split, India, Tang Dynasty, Ming Dynasty of China. It was a very, very hectic time. There's a lot of people, and that's because of this increased mixing. And hopefully you got that basic understanding of that as we move forward. So moving forward, here's our new framework. Now, there are three big things we're going to be learning about. The gunpowder empires, Europe that's transitioning, and a growing global economy. And this is the date that changed everything, 1492. This is the game changer. This is the first time in human history that the four world zones became one world. It was truly a global world with this date, with Columbus's arrival in North America. Columbus never set foot on what we consider the United States of America today. Let's just get that out of the way now. And we're going from this era of hemispheric interactions to this global age. And you can see it's not as lengthy, and we see it's not as hectic as all this. We can see big, bold colors here, and we'll get into what those are. Now, there are some concepts and some terms that you need to know that were the foundation of this unit. And the first one is absolutism. And you can see from the word absolute, it means absolute power. So during this time, political leaders had absolute power. They could do anything they want. And there's a maxim that I believe in that says power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you're in a position that you have absolute total power, things are going to happen. You can probably guess what those are. So that's absolutism. It's an idea. It's a way of thinking. Very closely related during this time is the divine right of kings. So these monarchs, this word monarch, king and queen, it's essentially the philosophical justification that you can do whatever you want because God wants you to be in control. So it's why our founding fathers, the United States, separated church and state, because if you mix the church with the state, political leaders can use that church power to do what they will. And our founding fathers were very aware of what had happened before they founded this country. So thank you, founding fathers. European Enlightenment. Now, European Enlightenment's a way of thinking, and enlightenment, it probably comes to mind. If you're in a dark room, you can't see very well. I turn on the lights, you can see a whole lot better. And it was this way of thinking that emphasized reason and individualism rather than tradition. And these are some Enlightenment philosophers. You probably recognize some of them. Thomas Jefferson, the man that wrote our Declaration of Independence, and Benjamin Franklin, the guy that's on a $100 bill, and some of these other people you may have heard of. Now, this is me in Scotland, and I'm visiting the tombs of some Enlightenment philosophers. Here's the tomb of Adam Ferguson, and here's the tomb of David Hume, paying my respects. There's David Hume. And these are the men that are behind the way we think today. And it's hard to understand, you know, if you take a step back. There's a term called epistemology. Why do I think what I think? And you've been surrounded by this Enlightenment thinking your entire life growing up in the United States, and we can trace it to these people. We'll get into detail when the time comes. Now, also during this time, there's something called the European miracles, a term coined by historian Eric Jones. And it's Europe going from this backwater, poor, ignorant, lousy place to be. You recall the, bubonic plague and whatnot, to being a very powerful force in the world, hegemony. And it's essentially a math problem. The European miracle, because four things happened. The Reformation, with the Renaissance, with the scientific revolution, add it to the Enlightenment and the Age of Discovery, you have the European miracle. This year, the Cleveland Browns went 0-16. if they were to go and be a Super Bowl champion next year, it's essentially that. That might be even too strong, but it's essentially going from a bad place to a very good place. I don't think the Browns are going to win the Super Bowl next year. Now, this idea of nation state is very complex. It's very difficult, and it's going to take some time to get this across. But it's the beginning. It's the fledgling. It's the zygote of what we consider a modern nation. So if I say we're all Americans, okay, what does that mean? Now, we have a common history. They make you learn it 3 years of your life in the United States. Language. We speak English in our classrooms, and people who come from other countries, we have them assimilate by learning English. Territory, we have boundaries, you know. You cross the tunnel or you take the bridge, you're in Windsor now, you're in a different country. Might not feel like it, but it's a different country, different culture. I say American culture, what comes to mind? McDonald's and cars and football or whatever you think of. Religion, nationality. Put this all together, it creates this notion of a nation state. And in the world today, you know, we have, you know, many countries. How did they form? So that's this idea of nation state. Protestant Reformation. Now, this man, Martin Luther, was a Catholic monk that hammered to the door of the Church of Wittenberg 95 things, called 95 Theses, that he said, you know, was an issue with the church. The church brought him before the Diet of Worms, which were his people. They kicked him out, and he formed a whole different church called Protestantism. And this diagram here, if you're any of these, started with Lutheranism, and if you're evangelical, Episcopal, Congregationalist, Methodist, it came from this. Before Martin Luther, there was the Holy Roman Church and the Orthodox Church. Now you're saying, who cares about some religious thing? The Catholic Church at the time, and actually until the 1960s, would give the masses in Latin, and the people didn't understand it. Martin Luther said you should have your services in whatever language you speak, and you should read your Bible. And a lot of people couldn't read at that point, and they said, well, let's fix that. And if you can read a Bible, you can read everything else. You can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball, that sort of thing. Now, the Renaissance, another part of the European miracle, life got good. Life got good in the land of handsome men, Italy, and it affected in a very positive way, philosophy, politics, literature, architecture. If you don't get it, let me just give you the philosophical vibe. It's June. You're in a hot classroom. You've just taken 5 finals. It's really unpleasant. It's really hard. And then all of a sudden, there's a pool party that night. It's going from a really rough place to a really good place. If you can fundamentally get that, that's the first flavor of the Renaissance I want to get to you. It also gave us Donatello, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo. We'll get into that. I just had to throw that in there. That's where a lot of people know of the Renaissance. Now, revolution, there was a lot of revolution going on, and revolution is a change. And 2 types, and this goes all the way back to Aristotle and the ancient Greeks. You can either completely scrap it and start over, or you can change an existing thing. And revolution, it's easy to destroy, it's hard to rebuild. So a lot of these changes were taking place. Some were good, some were bad, some are arguable. But revolution is when the people have had enough and they force a change. One of my favorite subjects in history. I look forward to that day. Scientific revolution. People started understanding their worlds, with science and not superstition or whatever. So lightning was in the sky. It wasn't Zeus throwing a lightning bolt across the sky, or you know, you hear thunder, or God is bowling. It's not that. We can explain it using science. And people started shifting from a superstitious view of the world to a more scientific view, and the rise of physics and biology and astronomy. And just to graduate high school, you have to take these courses in the hopes as an adult you use them. During this time, capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system where there's competition. We live in it. We should understand capitalism. I look at my classes. Some people might go off and get really wealthy, be super wealthy. You're living out in Grosse Pointe, Bloomfield Hills, big house. Life is good. Some of you might be middle class. You wind up, you know, well, around where the school is, very middle of the road. You know, some of you might wind up worse than what you're doing now. We don't know. There's movement in this, and it's get that money. You try to make as much money as you can, and that's the way capitalism is. It's an economic term. Coerced labor. Unfortunately, during this time, to make the economy flow, people were forced to labor against their own will. The most obvious one is slavery. At the same time, unfortunately, there was other coerced labor. bride buying, child labor, indentured servitude, human trafficking, penal labor, and we'll get into this. But to make the world economy flow, it was on the backs of a lot of people forced to work. Columbian exchange. Next time you go grocery shopping, next time you go to Myers, you go to Kroger's, you're looking around at all the good food, you can thank the Columbian exchange. Now, whether Columbus's arrival in America was a positive, a negative, a mixed, we're going to get into that. But one thing we can say is that the commodities from this hemisphere of the world came over, and the commodities here from this Western hemisphere came here. So if right now here were some of these commodities, turkey, I see turkey, I see corn. Okay, what else do I see? I see chocolate and I see tobacco. So if somebody in Asia is having a turkey sandwich, a Hershey's bar, and a smoke for lunch, that's not native to this side, but he or she is enjoying that. Now, here we see beef and we see grapes. So if I'm eating, a nice hamburger with some onions on it and, a glass of grape juice, whatever, the commodities mixed, and to this day, these commodities are on both sides. And people make their livings. If you look at these industries, these are really, really big industries. So this economic engine was really sparked by this exchange. Unfortunately, when the Europeans arrived in the quote-unquote New World, it wasn't new to the people who were here. It's just a term Europeans coined. But because of the bubonic plague and because of the mixing on the trans-Saharan trade routes and in the Silk Road, these people that came to the Americas had an immune system the natives did not. And smallpox primarily decimated the populations. And you can see here in the span of a century just how destructive it was. In fact, the Great Dying is an appropriate term. Global interdependence. Once this happened, and similar to the Columbian exchange, we relied on the world to meet our needs. Now, we've all been raised having access to foods from all over the world. We're accustomed to it. There are certain items we cannot grow here in the United States, so we rely on some other part of the world. They rely on us. So this global interdependence occurred once Columbus arrived and the world became global. Mercantilism is not a nice way to make some money. It's essentially saying, well, I'm going to get rich. How am I going to get rich? I'm going to take over somebody. I'm going to force them to buy my stuff. And in addition to that, I'm probably going to take their raw materials, take it to my homeland, make it a finished good, and then make them buy that finished good. It's effective. It's not nice, but a lot of these European nations made a fortune off this economic system. Empire. Now, this is an old one, but this continued. Empire, we've seen these all the way from the time of Alexander the Great. You get bigger by conquering others. This did not stop during this era. In fact, we've seen empire in Unit 1, Unit 2, and we see it again here in Unit 3. Gunpowder empires. It's fairly simple. If you look at your geohistogram, after all that hemispheric interaction, we see the European nations, we see the Ottomans, we see the Safavids, we see the Mughal, we see the Russians, and we see Ming China. These were the big, powerful empires that emerged during this time. It's real simple. Guns. I'm a fairly big guy. Even the smallest kid in the class, they're pointing a gun at me, you win. Guns will change the game, and guns did change the game.